So how's everybody doing? Does anybody feel like sharing? Yeah.
So I just thought I'd share what's been like for me. It sort of particularly came together when you and Amy were talking about the fast path and the slow path. And I feel like I want the fast path, but I'm on the slow path. It's been a sort of very relaxing retreat. As I said the first time I spoke, is when I go into meditation, it's pretty empty of thought. And when I walk around, it's pretty empty of thought as well, which is not my usual state of being. So I've been pretty relaxed and just in the present and not a whole lot of thought, which has been interesting, and I'm sort of seeing where it will go. One thing that does keep coming up for me somewhat that is I've been in the past particularly year really working on this idea that what we see is through a lens and to be aware of the lens. And a place that's coming up a lot here is around the whole issue when I hear people talk of God levels and soul levels. And my parents were pretty confirmed atheists. And I was raised really with the idea that God is a delusion, which pretty much everybody shares except people in my family. And with no spiritual overtone either. That was just how it was. And when you're dead, you're gone, and that's it. And until maybe, 20 years ago, that was pretty much my experience of life. And then I had some experiences which felt like, I wouldn't say they were awakening, but certainly expanded consciousness and an awareness, experience that you could experience life in very different ways. And so that got me interested really in spirituality, and I've been sort of pursuing that. But still, so anyway, sitting here through much of the retreat, I've said, okay, well, this is an opportunity to feel open to other ways of thinking about these levels and guides and souls and so on. So I've been really working on feeling open to other ideas and approaches. And one piece of that is that when I've been thinking about, it's not enough to say, okay, I see it through a lens and sort of then you're there. But for me, I've become aware of the sort of internal force that I bring to saying, yes, but my lens is the way it is. And in order to release it or fully become aware that it is just a lens, it's often necessary to come to terms with the force that resists all of that. And so I've been trying to use much of this retreat to look at, I feel actually pretty open to the idea of other, ways of that things are or ways of experiencing them. Still, what's the force that binds me to my old way of thinking and gets in the way of the openness? Not that I feel I've reached any resolution of that, but it's sort of what I've been kind of playing with. And another piece of it is that, I don't know how it really fits in, is with regard to the self. that along with this sort of being aware of the lenses, I felt a much more sort of, I don't know, well, it used to be that when I would think, I would sort of think a thought, and then there'd be another thought, maybe a feeling with it, and there'd be a sort of linearity to it. And even if I sort of, and that was it most of the time. And then what started happening is the experience of really having multiple thoughts at once, which sometimes are contradictory, but are both talking at once and are feeling forced at once. And sometimes, even if they're contradictory, there's then another piece thought of looking at it all, and then there's another thought behind that, looking at all of that. And so when I'm thinking, 3 or 4 thoughts at once, I can't really say, well, is any, I mean, you know, there's no individual I in that. I don't know, I'm all of it or none of it, or I don't know. So it's sort of a sense of just all these things going on in my head that tend to mean I identify with any one of them much less because they're multiple ones. So I'm not sure I even really have a question about it. My experience of the retreat is I see these things and I look and, okay, I'm kind of waiting to see where it goes. Although any suggestions of putting me more on the fast track would be welcome.
What if you're on the fast track and you just don't recognize that?
Well, that could be too. I don't know. Yes. That's the feeling I have a lot is that it's all loosening up. And loosening up means you don't come to conclusions in the same way. It's just loosening up. And that's sort of been my experience of it, which has been very useful, I think. I hope it persists when I go home.
And can you describe attempt anyway what is, so you're talking about there's awareness of these thoughts all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
What's aware of all those thoughts at the same time?
Yeah, it's a little bit like being in a room with a committee and watching an argument. And I'm kind of watching the argument. I mean, well, that's one me, but I'm also the arguers. I mean, I'm all of it. It's not. So but there is a kind of a watcher, and then there's the experience of feeling stuck. Okay, now I've got all this, and then what? And then sort of the proverbial little voice in the back of my head says something, and I've wondered if that is, in a sense, me at a different plane, or is a guide. Because when you talk of guides, it sounds like something other than you. But I don't know. I don't have a sense. It's just a little voice. I haven't had an experience of guides who've guided. I once, and then have been able to have it a few other times, had the sense of almost sort of beings on my shoulder, but I haven't figured out how to ask them anything. Or at least when I do, they don't say anything. So anyway.
Everything is one singular I, so it's one I, but it's like that I having a expression here is different than the I having an expression here, which is different than the I having an expression as a guide. So in terms of oneness or individuation, it's the same rules kind of apply as rules here. So are they individual? Yes, no. Are they oneness? Yes, no. Right? It's the whole, it's all yes. And I also am curious if there's any similarity between the space that you are describing or the quality you are describing in your meditation of a softness with the awareness when all these arguments are happening.
Yes, the experience in meditation feels quite different. Well, I don't know if it feels different. The meditation feels empty of content. The multiplicity of thoughts is quite full.
Right, and then that multiplicity of thought is content.
Yes.
Right, and sometimes this watching place, or is called the witness, a witness place, where there's still a sense of being in the mind that can witness and not be caught up in all the, I would call it the peanut gallery, all these different things. And in terms of a direction of surrendering through the witness is also a good pointer. And it doesn't matter for me in terms of my teaching of saying whether one believes in God, doesn't believe in God, experiences God, doesn't experience God.
Well, I've gotten that. I'm clear of it, on that piece, yes.
Yeah, it's really each of our own direct experience that matters. And I remember one person in particular that was a complete, absolute atheist. But they were so present in their life because this was their one life. And every second mattered. And so they were present and kind and loving and were like, no, you die and you're dead. That's it. So it doesn't, I don't know that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to feel you die and you're dead. Now I don't know. I mean, I'm open to other possibilities, but that raises the question, is it then a choice as to how you see it? Or does it just kind of come?
That's a beautiful question. Let me be quiet for a moment. I've been having this intense pull backwards since I sat down, and I'm going to let myself go, and I don't know if I will answer your question or not in the return, but if I don't, I'd love for you to ask it again. Okay. So I'm going to see if I can answer your question. Part of the game board we're in creates the experience of choice. And so it's part of the play. And in terms of the choice you're asking about, what comes forward for me is more about the inspiration of exploration. So if you're born into a family that has a particular blueprint, you get to have that experience. And then there's an inspiration or a curiosity that itself ignites the interest or the guiding force of like, I wonder what's possible. And that inspiration is also a deeper aspect of your consciousness coming forward into the game board to play. And so it seems to me there's both this relative experience of choice, but that's also being orchestrated by a larger overarching game board, which is also true in that is then there's an overarching game board that's consciousnesses guiding and playing and exploring. So it seems to me it's a mix of that play of choice and divine exploration that sometimes gives its player pieces a choice. So here there's an awareness of this work, this role isn't a choice. That's what this one aspect of this lifetime was about. I get to choose what clothes I wear. Personality totally gets to choose. Feel like pink? Feel like white? How about blue? You know? Mm-hmm. And sometimes my clothes choose me. There was one day a particular sarong was like, it's me today. You know? Like the colors and consciousness of those colors was what was needed for that satsang. So I open up my closet and the sarong says, it's me today. I was like, really? Okay. I usually choose, but okay. Come on. We're going to satsang, you know? So, yeah. So it's this play. It's this play. And I'm sure you can feel into your life and feel places that just feel like there was no choice. It was just going to be that way.
Right. Increasingly, I feel like I choose less than I think I do.
Right. So I had an experience when I was a teenager in college. I had a beloved horse at the time and was about to go out riding. And there was this moment of, did I wear the helmet or not? And I remember it was just so poignant. It was like the world opened up, the universe opened up in that moment of, this choice matters. And I never wore a helmet. I hated wearing helmets. It cuts off my vision, takes the sunshine off the top of my head, you know? And so in that moment, I decided, okay, I'll wear the helmet. And the person who was in charge of the cross-country course that I rode in never was riding, happened to be riding that morning. Had I been seen without a helmet, I probably would have lost my privileges for riding in this amazing place. So I didn't get hurt. But it was one of those things of the universe offering this moment of, yes, there is actually choice. So sometimes we have like that, the personality or whichever level of consciousness gets the experience of choice. It's part of this universe. It's part of the framework of this game, of this game board.
It just evoked in me, I know that many of my sort of critical life choices where you actually are at a point, you can go this way, you can go that way. My experience was that I would think and then the answer would just appear. And it was clear that, yes, in a sense, I'd made the choice. I mean, I knew I was facing the decision. And then I was decided. But what happened in between just sort of happened to me. So
Right, and that's
what I
awesome,
feel.
right? Like that's the truth of something just appearing.
Right.
So in some sense, the choice about wearing the helmet or not, that appeared, but it was also shown that a different outcome would actually arise, depending upon that. But often it just appears. And that is that miracle of being with both the appearance and the nothingness from which that arises from, or the I feel like I need to change my language around nothingness, it's like, or, arising from that which one cannot see and cannot know, arising from the unnameable, unknowable. And what's just present now is that feeling of resting with that. Like you have the example of the thought of the appearance from where, and what just came and is to be with that possibility while resting in your heart, being in heart space with that possibility of just the miracle appearance. And play with that in your meditation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. You're welcome. It's a total delight having you here. It's not typical that I have someone who has that more atheist background, which I've been very aware of for the whole week of where you're coming from. And so I've so appreciated your responses, your internal responses, both in things that are like, what, to the openness, to the whole range. So it's like I'm so deeply appreciative for your being here, and it's also a total delight to see, who this being is that I had only heard about before. So it's so I'm just absolutely delighted to know you and meet you and to.
Very glad I'm here. I very much appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
When you said to Mary, when she talked about the man on the white horse kind of thing, that she earned that. So I'm asking about earning in this context of spiritual growth.
There's compassion and understanding in the truth of ourselves and the depth of ourselves, and these layers of game boards that are created and manifest out of each other, all have a deep compassion and brilliance intrinsic to the whole thing. And so when consciousness makes a sense of self and tosses it out on the game board, there's a full recognition of what that means. This is the humility back and forth between these layers that I was speaking about. And so there's total recognition and acknowledgement of the challenge and the difficulty and the effort that is experienced in life, in the evolution, in the maturing. And so sometimes there's resting that's needed. I mean, even just in this life with guides, if there's been a kind of extreme workout for an extended period of time. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes my guides will come in and say, why don't you take a break?
Really?
Not often, but it does happen. And when I say, really? That's often my response, really? I get a break? Wow, thank you. So there's just an honoring of that. And sometimes we don't get a break because the lesson requires not having a break. Or we get a partial break that's enough for just enough of, catch a few breaths of air because the lesson is requiring something deeper. So you get these partial things. So it's more in the relative sense of the consciousness, having wisdom and compassion and understanding for what it's doing. So it's not about good enough or achievement or...
So it's more a reward for...
It's not even a reward. It's just an honest... Because it's not... So there's a woman that I knew who had just completely debilitating headaches, migraines. She couldn't work, couldn't function very much for years and years and years. And one of the things that I was seeing with her was that she was learning endurance. She was in an upper PhD life program because her soul wanted to learn how to sustain consciousness in the midst of intense pain because of a station that her soul wanted to move to in terms of supporting humanity. So soul level, God self level, right? There's this other plan. So it was an extreme life. So she would get little let-ups, but the lesson plan was to actually endure. So did she deserve a break? Deserve is not relevant. Did she earn a break? Earning is not relevant. There's a perfection that's happening. So that was a perfection. And the way that it had been being framed, it was a useful response saying that it had been earned. Because there wasn't a resting and a receiving and just like, okay, that gets to happen.
So perhaps it's more honoring than earning.
But everything is honoring. The life of migraines is honoring.
I don't understand that.
Because it's consciousness unfolding itself in a perfection. That's the fastest way for that to be learned. In that particular case, in that particular configuration, in this particular moment in time, with that particular DNA, and that particular, it's just a whole setup. And so it's honoring, like honor, if you're going to use that word, everything is that. So in some ways then the word doesn't apply, right? It's just consciousness orchestrating itself in this unfolding perfection, which for me starts to make sense when you start looking at all these layers and start seeing the overarching game board and the overarching lesson plan and why something is particularly perfect, right? I mean, the whole chemical sensitivity thing and Lyme disease and all that, right? The lesson plan, it was, right, it was the lesson plan for being able to do what happens now. All levels of it. So, and this is where then the good or the bad is just isn't relevant so much on one level when you're with the perfection of what's happening. It changes one's relationship to it. So the goodness of each being, if not good enough as part of the theme, goodness is intrinsic. So all these dualities of good or bad or all those things become irrelevant because they don't apply anymore. Once you open up to this deeper truth, the storylines aren't really relevant. So the truth of your goodness, right? You're beyond. Your being is so far beyond good or bad. This profound brilliance, this profound magnificence that is playing itself out.
It's easier for me to understand the word exploring than playing.
Sure, makes sense.
But you use game board and playing a lot.
And playing comes from that deeper place where there's freedom. Because if you know you're free, then it's okay to play in entrapment.
Say that?
So if you're free, then it's okay to play in entrapment. Because you're free. It's not real.
Anyway. Oh, I get it. Okay.
So that's why I use the word play.
But they're basically meaning the same thing.
I'm using them that way, yeah.
Okay. All right. Good.
Yeah. With that. Did that help at least with part of what you were? Okay. Was there more there?
Well, it's the achievement, perfectionism, all this stuff. I mean, I surrendered through perfectionism. And I can't remember now what all the different levels I got to. But it's all about that being good enough to not be separate from God.
So what if your sense of separation from God was perfect because that was the experiment that was wanting to be played out?
What? Whose experiment?
You as God.
Well, it worked.
Well, what if that's actually perfect? What if that was what you came here to experience and there's not actually a problem and you don't have to fix that? And that it's actually perfect.
It's perfect to still believe I'm separate from God?
I'm saying, what if your
What if that was
experience of
the-
being separate is
Okay.
actually perfect?
That would be a stretch. I recognize that as my interpretation, lifetime after lifetime of rejection and being cut off by significant people and taking on the blame for it, and getting involved in lifetime after lifetime of religious orders, and that's really not the best place to be if you have that problem. I get it that it is a misinterpretation. Well, how do I get rid of that?
Well, part of where I'm going at this moment is about the music and, seeing how far one can stray from Grandma's house.
All right.
And that if part of this whole sense of separation is part of this divine play because of what can be explored in that way, and all the things that you have explored have been perfect, and this inner call back to union is then part of the game board. And so there's a pain in this sense of separation. And pain, in my understanding, is because attention wants to go somewhere. Attention wants to go to that. You cut your leg, well, attention wants to go there and clean it out, do whatever. Emotionally, we have an emotional pain. Oftentimes people ignore it, but what's actually really wanted is being present with that pain. That is what helps resolve it. And so here you are at this place of feeling the intensity of a pain of that separation. It's just for attention to go there. But I'm just tossing in like, well, what if the whole thing is perfect? And so now it's just time to meet that pain and surrender through it, because you never actually have been separate. It's not actually possible. So I'm just tossing out an idea of what if this feeling that you have of the sense of separation that feels not perfect, what if that actually is perfect? And there's just this invitation to surrender through it.
Okay.
I mean, these game boards are set up in perfection. They're set up in brilliant design. So then there's nothing to fix. You don't actually have to do anything. There's just a resting back. And you won't be judging this pain that's in there. There'll just be a resting with it, and that unfolds.
I'll keep you posted.
It feels useful to meet that with the idea that it's perfect. Because the mind is so convinced it's not. The mind is so convinced it's a problem and there's something wrong. And I'm just tossing in, well, what if that's not the case?
Okay.
And see what happens in there with that. Thank you. I remember at one point experiencing what I would have described, at the time as the simultaneous universe sort of tossing itself out to its edges and pulling itself back in at the same time. This simultaneous movement of the appearance and the disappearance. And that it's the way the universe gets to explore itself through this massive multiplicity. And in that experience, there was also it was one of those times where I was exploring physics, these forces of consciousness, and feeling that force that sends one out, but that also pulls one back. It's like the game is rigged. It's boomerang rigged. So you are the whole thing always.
Like an elastic.
Well, sort of, in that it's actually more quantum than that, right? It's more mysterious. And the sensation of it, but it was like this embodied sensation of the movements in both directions simultaneously. And one of the ways, and I mentioned this earlier on, one of the ways that sort of force of nature, force of existence, pulls itself back, that inner feeling in yourself of, oh, I'm supposed to be here, or I need to go there, that inner sense of direction. Ooh, I'm in the wrong spot. Self-correct, that pull is just another aspect of consciousness. But that was part of how that whole thing revealed itself, because I was curious about this in my game and play of surrendering through anything that appeared, things that I took for granted my whole life. That was the guiding principle in everything. I just took it for granted. And then there was suddenly this awareness of, oh, wait a minute, since so much had been let go of, oh, that thing appears. What's that? Let me surrender through that. And so then the same process would happen of the surrendering that sense of self, surrendering the envelope of I am into that, and discovering it's the same I am, manifesting itself as another aspect of the whole play, or the whole exploration, the whole game.
The thought that just came to me is like the going out and coming in, the all or nothing, the experience. Is that like the going out is the experience and the coming back is home with God? Am I just...
So it just gets tricky because our minds work in a linear way.
Yeah.
There's a certain aspect of that. And there's a simultaneousness that's hard for the mind to sort of grok. And so when I'm speaking about all these layers holographically being the same, and the pathways between the stars are in between my cells, and the humility of the human being in in humbleness to this God self, and the God self being in total humility and humbleness to the human, for how the same self is manifesting itself, right? It's that's the best I can do, right? It's like they're or if you think of that toroidal thing, right? That field goes this way, this other field goes the other direction at the same time. It's this, I don't know, feedback loop is almost too linear also.
Yeah.
But, but for that feeling of being lost, or it's like you're never lost, it's just not possible. It's just the game, that's the exploration that's at play. I think I also use the word play because it sometimes feels like things are sort of set. Play and an experiment and an exploration, like this, like things that are sort of set, like a how do I describe this? It's like each of us being a unique expression that has a unique sound, a unique geometry. Right? So you take these unique things and then you put them together and you see what happens. So it's kind of like that too, of this, but it's the embodied experiment. It's the embodied exploration, the embodied play.
It sounds harsh if you think of the people as being themselves. And
Well,
God is just playing with an experiment with us. Experimenting.
No, but it's God having the experience.
That's the difference. You have to have that to not get pissed off at the other.
And that's where the humility also then comes from, because there's this profound recognition and compassion and love and brilliance and understanding all together.
And also, it's all my choice. It's all I'm willing to play.
Ooh.
I'm just trying to express. This is not being forced on me. I'm choosing the whole way. I'm making these. When I say I'm making the decisions, I'm not.
You're making the decision to be born?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I say, my mother and my father and I got together and said, it's going to be this way. It was a choice on their part to play their parts, and a choice on my part to subject myself to this. Well, it was painful for all three of us.
Yeah, I'm aware of all
And
this.
that's the excuse that it was painful for all of them. And that's the excuse that justified it. It was painful for all of them.
No, I'm not saying it's painful for all of us. I'm just saying it was painful. We all chose it willingly. We all knew what we were doing.
But the game board changes once you arrive. It's not within your control.
I remember there's a memory of being born and saying, "Oh no, I didn't want it. I didn't want it that way." But that's After, that's part of the game.
Well, that's what I mean, after.
After I made the free choice to go and to
Okay, but this is free choice of whom, and this is supposed to be God making the choice?
of course I'm doing it
Expression.
for when I look out at the trees and everything, and they're waving and they're having a good time, they are saying hallelujah, hallelujah. They are in joy and dancing and in gratitude to that which is doing this. You know what? It's what you said. It's all a matter of where you're standing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I wanted to jump in, and that
It's a matter of
Richard's coming from a perspective of opening to these levels where he's seeing from these larger perspectives, where there's a recognition of choosing a particular life or being in that state of oneness with the consciousness of the trees, which are in reverence to God and sun and water, and there's when you open
I
to
don't
that.
disagree with that.
Well, but the place that I've been here, and it may just be where your question is coming from, the question around the place that feels separate. So when he's speaking from a place that doesn't feel separate. And part of the pain that you're speaking about, I'm not saying you don't have these larger experiences. I'm saying the place of your question is arising from a place that's separate, and that's why what's being said is different. So and your question still comes from that place of like this place of pain and separation where it sounds like it almost feels like God did this to you, and it's like what like some frustration. It's like there's that place of
When it comes
separation.
out as this is an experiment,
as opposed to you are the one who's experimenting. Because when you're speaking, it sounds to me like you're coming from the human place that feels separate, and it's like I'm an experiment, as opposed to recognizing that you are this profound, exquisite, brilliant creation happening.
this is seen through the funnel of Calvin and various religious figures of many lifetimes, but
Well, let me be quiet for a minute here with you. Because there's the layers. There's the part that's angry. There's the part that's pissed off, feels like stupid experiment. This sucks. I didn't buy into this. Like that place that's angry at the church, that's angry at all these things that led you astray. Right? And one can work through all those emotional layers. But it seems to me that you may not need to.
oh, good.
That there's because I don't always hear you speaking this way.
No, right.
Right? There's other retreats where there's just been so much spaciousness, right? So this is just the piece that's coming up now. So so you can set it aside. And if you can set it aside and come back into your heart, into the place of love where you know your love, into that, and the deeper love, right? This deeper love, the joy like when you're out in nature and playing, or the joy of having your Day5 friend show up and drop you down the slide into nothing. Right? That joy of life. So let that be the fire that burns the anger, or burns the confusion, or burns the separation. Because when you're in that joy, there's no separation. You're yourself, your diva buddies are your diva buddies, that, just all these things are just gorgeous humming frequencies of one singular orchestra.
But to get that, you have to get the oneness. Rather than, it is coming from separation.
Right, so what I'm wanting to do is, in this moment, is find a pathway in through you that bypasses all that, that bypasses the mind, the anger, the lifetimes, the storylines, all those things, to a direct experience that you have in this lifetime where you're not actually feeling separation. And when I see those moments when you've shared about connecting with devas, I see that wholeness. I see that there's not a separation. I see there's a total joy of being, a delight in the game, a play with beings in different frequencies while you're still present here in your body and enjoying the delight of the opening. So I would just encourage you to keep opening there. Because the anger, it has validation through these different lifetimes which you have access to, one degree or another. But on another level, it can be relevant and it can also be irrelevant. And right now, that stuff feels so thick, you're not going to get through it in that way. Whereas if you surrender into this other truth of softness and delight and love and gentleness and play and flexibility, where that all those, things as frequencies. Like that feels like a pathway in for you into that fluidity and malleability, and to let that be the resting place and see what happens with the anger from there. Or maybe it doesn't show up again and it just dissolves on its own. Like Alka-Seltzer in a cup. I don't know.
I like that. Fizz, fizz. I'm going to write that down, fizz, fizz.
Right? It's a gentler version of the garbage disposal.
Yeah, when I was there, it was a very different place. It's not great. It's like I'm identifying with the victim position. And that's a choice. Which?
It's not a choice until you realize it is a choice.
Right. That is a critical step to recognize that. And I've worked people through this so many times, but it's like unfinished business.
Mm-hmm.
Which is all it is.
Mm-hmm. Right, it's a storyline that still seems to gain traction, that there's truth in it.
Yeah, well, I was just doing some journaling and rehashing some old things, and of course that probably put me right there. So.
Right, well, but that's what I mean, like these storylines will validate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get it.
until there's a shift, and then the same storyline could happen, but it's not actually interpreted and experienced the same way.
That would be good.
So seeing through the victim, right? That victim plays being a victim to God. Where Richard was saying, no, you're not a victim, you chose it, which then of course is going to piss you off, because from that victim place, it's like, I don't want to say piss you off, right? You use your own words, but in terms of, in terms of, then it's like, because you're not experiencing yourself in the place of choosing, you're experiencing yourself in this victim. And I think it's really, really useful to say one doesn't have a choice until you recognize it. But that's part of the unfolding. That's part of the unfolding, the revelations that happen through this particular game board.
Yeah, the game board gets me because it feels like an invalidation somehow, like you're a pawn.
Well, it's interesting because the way that I say it, right, is you're a player piece on the game board. But what I also say is that you are the game board. And you are the totality that creates the game board to then... So one of the experiences I had was, and it was connected with the whole thing of God dreaming, of seeing God's dreams of these universes, is that it's like the mind has an idea and projects out a universe, and then projects out a player to then play in that universe. So I was also seeing it in dreaming, of when we dream, it's like dreaming a landscape to then project oneself into, to then play in that landscape. So it is play. And we're also, it's kind of like that thing, and how far can you get away from grandma's house in terms of playing, and a lot of dissonance and suffering, and there's a lot that's here. But it still can be seen through. It can still be seen through and then experienced differently. And recognized differently.
Yeah, I just need to do some work here. I mean, I've been in all these places, in all these different perspectives. But the terminology, I'm glad I brought up the game board and the play, because that, I was taught that play had no value. Work had value. You earned everything. You did all, Of course, you didn't get any rewards at the end unless you graduated, but that was the reward,
Uh-huh.
So it's useful to recognize it has to be the perspective, or the lens that you look through has to be from the lens of oneness. Everything is one. You are the game board as well as the game piece.
When you start opening up on those layers, right, it changes the experience. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the lessons, right, the lessons that are unfolding are perfect on each level. There are different lessons that are being learned as Nancy, and there's another whole set of lessons that's being learned as your soul, which has been all sorts of expressions. And another whole lesson plan of you as this brilliant love light of God in a uniqueness. that would be another potential play for you, is to go into meditation, ask your Deva buddies to help you surrender through your heart, through those layers of yourself, and see what happens. That's a fun exercise. I should all do that. Okay, I'm gonna hand this to
Crosstalk, it feels like our structure's falling apart.
Thank you. I don't feel like the structure's falling apart, but
Structure, but the crosstalk kind of it activates the personalities. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I usually don't have crosstalk, but there was something that actually I experienced as valuable in that exchange. So, yeah.
So I want to follow on this with the idea of choice. So it would seem to me that the universe would not set things in stone. You have this life and you must live this life to the end. There should be choice in every moment. Are you, in fact, at every level, choosing in every moment what you are doing? Or is there some sort of, the idea of a lesson plan looks to me like somebody hands you a piece of paper and says, go do this, but that doesn't sound like the fullness of the universe and all of these various pieces interacting to me. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah. So when I say lesson plan, so a lesson plan might be go learn how clay works.
And what if I said I don't, after a day or two, I'm not really interested in clay. I'd like to do something else. And if I'm God, God can say also, yeah, let's change it. Is that?
Yeah. So what I'm speaking about when I'm saying lesson plans is just what I've been seeing. And I could also use, instead of lesson plan, it could be a kind of exploration. So maybe the larger overarching lesson plan, if I keep going with your thing, is to explore different mediums. So you play with clay. That was interesting. Done with that. All right, I'm going to play with water and freezing it and chipping it. Okay, now I'm going to play with whatever that clay is that you roll and you can bake and cut, or, so maybe that overarching lesson plan is like, yeah, go play with stuff. And so then there's a creative thing. I mean, this gets back to the essence of what we're sharing here is there choice or not?
Yes, and I'm thinking that the choice has to be made. Everything sort of happens in every moment. I mean, it's if there's no time, if linear time doesn't really exist except in our storyline, and if there's no difference between God and the player on the game board in terms of being, in terms of I am, that I am seems to me would have to choose in every moment what is happening. But the way you're describing it is people get a certain life, they come in and it's like, oh no, oh my God, here I am and I have to live this horrible thing out, but can't they say when they're 5, this, I don't like this?
So, so what I love about part of what you're saying is it also opens to this larger perspective of the universe choosing in each moment, in that totality, yes. And that's the whole massive exploration that's happening. And in this, at least the way it looks to me at this moment, in this individuation, like in order for that exploration to happen, there's an organization of oneness. And that organization, so maybe part of the light ray here is healing and focus and intensity. And another light ray is like soft gentleness. And soft gentleness can be strong and intense. And intense focus and healing can actually be soft and gentle. So it still is oneness. It still is the totality intrinsic in each flavor. But by organizing itself as these flavors to then have a soul that then explores that particular expression through this lifetime and this lifetime and this lifetime and this lifetime. That it's more that it's an organizational principle of one singular consciousness to play with itself. So yes, the large, and I don't know the answer to this. My guess would be that it resonates to me as true in that of each particle nano moment of creation is one singular consciousness's choice in each thing. And if we bring it back down to the personality, I have seen circumstances of a life that someone was like, ooh, this isn't really quite what the soul plan was wanting. It's not that the personality doesn't want it, the soul recognizes, yeah, this isn't going to quite work, and the person dies. Right? At whatever age. Like I've seen that a number of times. You know, and been like, wow, because everyone's like, wait, what happened? You know? And other times one comes in planning to die young. So I've seen it's like there's no one set rule.
But no one item on this board has choice over any of the others. It feels like that.
That in that sense of individuation, I also experience a sense of will that is then part of the game board, part of the players on the game boards. And on each of these levels, there's a different jurisdiction of what is allowable. But part of the learning too is about will. And so people can use their will over someone else's, doesn't feel good. But it's part of the learning of what we are.
It sounds like an incredible organization. I mean,
Yeah.
astounding organization.
Yeah.
Not a free form, nothing.
Well, that's what I see is like everything arising out of that which it can't see in this unbelievable, mind-boggling orchestration that, I mean, I realize I see way more than most people, but I'm seeing a little fraction, you know? And then seeing how the layers of all the molecules and DNA and body and lifetimes and karma and planets and galaxies and, I mean, the physics, I mean, the whole thing.
It's astounding.
Completely. And then we get to have like this little experience of a, you know, human being in a little bouncy chair. It's just beyond brilliant.
So, when you bumped into the evolved beings, would you say that their system is just a higher level system of the one that we are all experiencing, or are they in a completely different system? And if so, like, how did you even meet?
Right. So they came to me because of a request, not of them. It was one of those inquiries, this sort of call out to the universe about evolution. And so they came to me to answer that question.
You requested?
I did. Yeah. It was in my inner inquiry of like, so what's evolution, or like, how does this work, you know? So one of the things that they shared with me is that my consciousness did not have the capacity to actually fully see them.
To see the beings.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so that they were, as best as possible, going to reveal themselves as best as my consciousness could actually comprehend. And so because of that degree of evolution, it's hard for me to see from where we are to track all the way through how they got there. But in that inquiry, they were showing me, and thank you for this question because I had forgotten about this piece. They were showing me both how they were currently functioning and where they were evolving to. Right? Because then they were showing how do we currently function as humans and where are we evolving to.
They were showing you that for us and that for them.
Yes. And that and they were showing, you know, when they were, the example I gave of them showing me that, well, you know how you guys, you will make something, you'll make something and you'll see how it works. You kind of need to make it outside yourself and you see, you know, or you say something and then you see the response. Ooh, you know, or what's the, and that as we evolve, it's more of an internal, one realizes beforehand, you have this internal barometer of what that refinement of frequency of what do you want to put out. And so when they were showing me their process, the best way that I could interpret them was that they were frequency beings and that they each still had their own uniqueness. They also functioned in total oneness, complete seamless communication with each other, where there was total transparency, and that their learning and growth process was an emanation. You know, you wouldn't let the emanation go all the way out to do something. There would be a presencing with the emanation to see how that felt. You didn't wait to see what it did. And so the fine-tuning happened on the inside. And so then I asked about where they were evolving to. And what they shared was more of themselves as frequencies, and that where they were evolving to was resting as particles, appearing and disappearing from what they knew of as source, where they couldn't see themselves but then bumped into appearance as a particle before they turned into a wave, into a frequency of being. And so where is that? I have no idea if it's right here, because they're functioning as the consciousness that makes waves and particles in physics and sound and light and all those things. That would make much more sense than them being in some other galaxy. Although maybe it's another galaxy, but holographically is the same thing here. Like I don't fully understand, right? I see this little piece of how the whole thing all fits together. But, and then I asked them where they would evolve after that. And they said, we don't know, we can't see. Same thing.
So it would seem like they are closer to ultimate oneness, Godhead, certainly than us, right? But then what happens if they actually get to the ultimate God?
So this is the mystery. We have no idea if there is one, because it's unending. So far, I don't. It may be that one opens to a finite. It also might be that it's an experiment that is just at play and just keeps actually exploring itself, and simply by the desire to open up to what's deeper, it's either revealed or it's created. I have no idea. Right? The tree and the leaf, do the roots keep growing more and the leaves keep growing out further? Or is it just all one whole cohesive, intrinsic as it is complete? I mean, I think that's the mystery that we never get to see, from which we arise.
Do you have any sense of, so that's where we're going. There's no sense if it will end ever or not. Do you have, in your experience, do you have any sense of a beginning?
So I haven't, not that's come to me, and I haven't explored it, although it's been a curiosity that has popped up a few times. And in that memory of 14 universes prior, right, there was this question of, oh, wait a minute, you know, that longevity of that I. So, and then there's been intellectual curiosity of, okay, what's the birthing point of a soul or a God self? I do remember being in what I would call God, which felt like a contained light field, and being a cell of light within that, and being gifted and being unique, but also being in total oneness and communication the same way these beings are that I spoke about, in the same way that I'm communicating with my guides. There's just a total seamlessness, which recognizes difference, recognizes perfection of learning, which recognizes soul, all maturing levels, right? There's a oneness that has a respect for total equality, but recognition for the differences. So in this God membrane, there was that same sense of communication, and this recognition of being everything that God was, but created in a smaller packet, with the capacity to then be. I don't have a memory of that in relation to anything else. It's a standalone memory, and I don't know about that in relation to the 14 universes that I remember. You know, and I love these questions, because it will also then, not that I'll seek these things, but in meditation, just because they've been talked about, they may then start coming forward. Because I have been curious about this soul, like the birth, and what that looks like, because there are people that I've met who feel to me like young souls, and they're perfect, right? There's this total perfection of their uniqueness and a level of innocence that's just purely because of not having had much experience. And then you can meet people that are just ancient, you know, even when they're 20. They're ancient. So, yeah.
If you figure out more tonight when you're... I'm serious.
Well, what's the heart of your question?
What is God? And the thing that interested me the most in what you said was when you were a cell in the God field, that you still had individuality. That seemed crazy to me. Like I imagine if as we're maturing and moving from here, these two up into here, that at some point we would lose a sense of individuality. So here you are, this one tiny little cell in this God field, and you still have an awareness of being a cell. So I don't know that there's a question. That's fascinating to me.
Well, that seems to me what so far keeps revealing itself on all of these levels. And which is also why I say I don't know if God is a cell of something larger. And that the macro and the micro continue to unfold together. And so these beings that I was speaking about, they felt more like the micro, right? Being these frequencies. And yet the expansion of them was profound. Right? So the simultaneousness of the roots and the branches. So I don't know what's true, right? And so far my experience continues to reveal a simultaneousness of that individual expression that's also one and keeps manifesting itself in this brilliance. I mean, your body, right, looks like it's one body. Well, if you go in, you've got these organs. The whole thing's being fed by the oxygen and the water and the food, right? So the inside and the outside is already seamless. And then you've got all these cells in here. They're alive. They're in communities. You kind of want them to stay in their own communities. You really want the cells of your blood vessels to stay in those communities. Don't want them to start spreading out into something else. Right? And then you've got all these other microorganisms, and then you've got your molecules. So that macro and micro is already here. So that just keeps happening, and then you've got humanity. All these people running around this planet. Right? And the overarching singular collective of human consciousness is also evolving. So everything seems to me to be in this macro and micro movement. And so what's God? It's you. But if the small self, that lens of the small self, pipes up and says, I'm God, we all recognize that's a problem. If one cell of your body started shouting, I'm the whole body, it's like, well, no. So it's like this. Let me be quiet for a moment. So if we come back to that thing about this exploration, right, of this divine exploration that's happening on all these rich, rich layers. And that the forgetting is part of the plan. because so much more exploration can happen in the forgetting. And the remembering is part of the plan. I have a dear friend who I remembered always just having a hard time with because he was so clueless, like so brilliant and so clueless. And so I looked at it one time, just kind of looking at, okay, what's the deal? I'm irritated by my own irritation. Let's just like get some clarity here. And I saw, oh, he mastered another universe. He mastered that universe. Completely brilliant being. And that universe wasn't made of the same elements that this one is. And so he's completely confounded by water. Because this universe is water. Right? We're 70% plus water. The earth is 70% whatever plus water. Our emotions are fluid. Right? There's a whole fluidity to this universe. And he comes from a universe that wasn't fluid in that way. So he's lost. He shows up, he's like, he can't figure out anything. Driving a car, I mean, it's just like, so my initial judgment was like, what is wrong with this guy? How come he's so brilliant and so not? So in this deeper looking, then I was seeing that. So in terms of falling asleep or waking up, and this divine exploration that's happening, right? The universe sets itself up to play and explore in infinite ways. And you are that. You are that magnificence. You are that mystery that all of that arises out of. And all these cells and all these atoms and all the little bits inside atoms that they can't quite figure out what's happening, right?
If he mastered that universe,
Yeah.
then where is, let's say this is us in this universe and this is him. Like I wanted you to map that. Like if he mastered that universe, I think of him as God over there. But we're God over here. Like he's like done it. It's all wrapped up. Like where does he fit on that on the map?
So it's no different. It's like as one singular consciousness wanting to explore itself, creating these vehicles of experience and perception and expression. It's like creating that, all right, go in the universe where you bake cakes. Learn about frosting and fluffy cake and wet cake and tasty cake and crumbly cake and right? And so it's like, all right, you have mastered cake. So the universe, right, gets to completely know cake through that individuated expression. And maybe it then makes another individuated expression. Well, what's cake like from that? I don't know. Let's send that one in for cake. Right? And then the one that's then gleaned all the information from cake through that individuated lens. I was talking about gentleness and strength. So just very simplistic way of saying something. So gentleness goes in and understands cake. And then it's like, all right, well, what happens if strength goes into cake? Let's find out. Right? And now gentleness has polished and perfected itself through all the experiences of cake. It's like, all right, let's go check out submarine making. You know? All right. So this divine exploration is just unfolding.
That this being mastered in this other universe, he mastered from a mental place, but not from a heart place. Because if you look at nature, what's true is that when you find the most opposite DNA to your own, you're going to create the strongest offspring possible. So my experience is that when we grow through the soul and we keep playing, it's a matter of ego. It's just I love this ego, I love this ego. And this ego learned to love itself through those elements. Okay. And then it got bored, but it didn't get bored of ego. So then he had to come to earth because he had to go to the opposite frequency to replicate itself, to have an offspring. So it's born out of desire. It's born out of, I want to see more of me. But the attraction is with the opposite element, is an otherness. Just like when we look at races and interracial, those genes have the more potential than all the other genes that if you've just been Italian. So I just think if we just look at nature, like all the answers are in nature. Look how nature does it. And I think the same is true of our soul. So if we're just, okay, I can't get over this boredom anymore, but my ego, but the soul's still so in love with the ego. It's going to find something else to give it more play. It's going to find, so that soul comes here fumbling all over the place and it has all these lessons to go through and like learn all this stuff, when really like master is really a matter of heart, right? That's when we transcend and we can talk to all the elements. All the elements are possible within us when the heart is awakened fully.
So I'd love to respond. Yeah. Thank you so much for jumping in. I only have one example of this particular friend. And there was mastery in all levels in that other lifetime. And it wasn't an egoic, from the way it sounds like you're speaking about it, intent in here. It was from the absolute brilliance of mastery and deep understanding. And when you may not have been here, I was speaking at one point about seeing all these different universes, and they were different universities. Were you here for that part? No. Okay. So and I was seeing that the incarnation happens in through one whole university, and then there's another whole exploration that can happen. And so it's not that it's a deficit or one didn't finish something. Like this friend of mine is rare, right? He's like, so, and it wasn't that the heart wasn't mastered in that. The whole configuration of mind, heart, that it was a whole different configuration. And so it feels different than coming here to then understand and master in that way. But it wasn't that the lesson plan, and this is a great clarification because other people have been saying things about lesson plan. So for me, clarifying the word lesson plan is really helpful. Because like, I don't mean lesson plan in that there's something that you need to learn because you missed it. Like, oh honey, you need to go learn this. Here's your lesson plan. I don't mean it like that at all. It's more the way I'm describing the cake. So the lesson plan might be, play with cake. Discover everything there is to know about that. And so for him, then coming here, it's just because it was a conundrum for me of like seeing this brilliance and confused by how one could be so brilliant and so clueless at the same time. And in terms of the elements, that's also what was confusing for him, because the foundation, the way the elements manifest here, is different than the way they were manifesting in this other universe. So the very fundamental aspect of himself functions in a different way. So I would agree with what you're saying in terms of nature and being in oneness with that and learning, and that the universe is just, from the little bit that I've seen, they're just different. So that his and so in his coming here, it's like a brilliant wizard right, who understood how things functioned in a different way, and then coming into this and feeling how the elements work and feeling the fluidity of water, he can't quite find himself because everything is so fluid. So like tying his shoes is a problem, you know. He's 40 something, right? And he's like, you know, bless his heart. You know, it's like, I love this guy. And I forget, were there other pieces of what you were sharing that I haven't sort of spoken to? Okay. But I hope this also kind of helps with the thing of like a lesson plan being a judgment plan or something. It's not like that at all. And in that, and it does seem to me that there's this place of freedom, of this exploration. And in some places, we get to have more of a sense of freedom and more of a sense of how you do it, right? Like for me, dancing was probably just going to be a part of my life. I got to do all these different kinds of dances. That's what it was. Did I go play football and check out rugby and like all that? No, like the exploration was in a particular way. And so each of us has this unique nature, but it's also inclusive of the totality. So, which is why we can have our kind of unique essence or unique flavor, but we recognize we're the totality, so everything is also here. And it's and that's part of what the whole play is, both in the expression in that way and then seeing how all those things go together. So then if I extrapolate on this example I was giving, so then you've got gentleness exploring cake and strength exploring cake. Well, then how do the gentleness and the strength experience each other while they're exploring cake? You know? So then everything then becomes this divine exploration and play. And then the surrendering is surrendering through these layers of the sense of self and seeing that it's a construct that's created for this play to happen. And so those constructs don't necessarily fall away. You can wake up and your body, lo and behold, still keeps all its parts together. There's just a realization on a deeper level. And that can continue to happen. I mean, I have heard of people disappearing into rainbow bodies and leaving fingernails and hair or something, right? I don't know, like I've heard. So I recognize from reports of others that sometimes it can happen, that consciousness can just remember itself in that way and return to that truth. But if that were to happen here, I probably couldn't report it. Oh well. But it hasn't happened. I don't.
And that would also say to me why a life might need to stay intact with a particular problem. In the same way that you don't want your body, shifting itself or some organ going off in the middle of it. You don't want that particular lifetime to change its path either. I mean, does that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a deep exploration happening. And this goes back to the perfect piece of the feeling, the separation being perfect. That there's a deep exploration happening that wants to resolve itself through this. And that's perfect.
Through this, meaning
You. You as the universe, exploring that through Nancy. who happens to have the universe that birthed itself as Kristin through you.
Yes, amazing, isn't it?
Mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. So shall we end here for
Just very
one
quick-
more?
No, very quick. Just in case you did some special amplification or experiment in the meditation this afternoon,
Uh-huh.
just in case, if you did or not, I don't know. But I felt very, very strong in the field, so just so you know.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. Have a gorgeous evening. See you back here at 7 unless I'm asleep. And yeah, enjoy. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much.